thank you everyone for joining us this Thursday evening to learn more about Hannah Colvin Griffith. I am really excited to be able to introduce Kristy to everyone. I know she's a familiar face to many of you. She's been with Historic Alexandria for 8 years. I would have guessed longer. We've been working together for quite some time, and it's been a fantastic learning process together. And this particular subject, Hannah Colvin Griffith, has been a focus for her for the past few semesters. She's working on her master's in world history at George Mason University. And so she's been following the story, the life of Hannah Griffith, and piecing it together really months, almost years maybe. She's probably become part of your family. I know new tidbits would come to light all the time, and we're really excited that tonight she gets to bring it all together for the Historic Alexandria and put all of this information into one place, because the pieces I've been hearing tell me that Hannah Griffith is a really fascinating story, and I'm personally looking forward to hearing more about her life. And with that, I'm just going to remind everyone, chat is where you put your questions. You can drop them anytime, but I'm going to wait until the very end of the presentation to ask them for Kristy. We'll hold about 15 minutes at the end for us to do those questions. And then I'm going to turn off my microphone and let Kristy get rolling.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me. I'm very excited about Hannah Griffith and telling you a little bit more about her tonight. For those of you who already know about her, she owned or operated, she was the proprietor. I will use that term a lot from here on out. So she was leasing the building, but not owning the building or the lands, but running the business, which she did own and operate, a coffee house from the smaller of our two Gadsby's Tavern Museum buildings, the one built in 1785. So very little did I know about her. And the more I dig deep into the archives at archaeology, Library of Virginia, and lots of other places, the more questions I have. So hopefully you give me some really great questions at the end of this to help propel me into the next step of research. But let me share with you what I know, because what I know is already very thrilling. As you can see on your screen, her name was Hannah Colville at birth, and that E on the end of Colville pops up every now and then in records like her marriage record and, well, the naming of her son Colville, the E is not there. So I happen to think that Hannah Colville had to tell a lot of people until she got married in her late teens, early 20s, that it was Hannah Colville without an E. And so I can just hear her saying that quite a bit. Either way, they're going to pop the E on there sometimes and then take it off at other times. She would name one of her sons Colville without the E. And she was all of these things and more. So this is just a few. I started out with a Venn diagram because looking back at a person who lived circa born 1748-ish, a lot of times you're trying to find the things that stand out the most and dig up info about their lives that way. But what do you say about her? She was born a British colonist of the New York colony. She would wind up dying an American and a member of the Virginia gentry, oddly enough. Still an outsider really, because her and her husband were both born in New York. But his job would take him into the inside, the very innards of Virginia gentry. He was friends with Lafayette. He was close with George Washington, staying overnight at least a dozen or more times for the 10 years that they were here in Alexandria. But let's take it back to, I mentioned she was born a British colonist, and circa, we hate circa means somewhere in the neighborhood of 1748. And I've calculated this because she needed her father's signature when she got married at the courthouse in 1766 in New York. So she was under 21, and this would put her being born around 1748, or maybe 3 years before that or 3 years after that. And she would wind up becoming quite a few things, but first on her list was that childhood, born somewhere between 1745 and 1751, growing up in New York was interesting, to say the least. And of course, she would actually be more educated than most. I say of course, because oftentimes when you hear of Virginia gentry, especially of the clergy class, their wives usually can read very well. And that's one of the things that you had to do in order to support the minister. So a minister is not going to be looking for a wife in amongst folks that aren't going to be able to help carry that load at the parish. So she actually not only reads, but unlike a lot of girls, she went on to learning how to write too, because those are two different subjects. So she had beautiful penmanship, and you'll see that a little bit later. Her father was William Colville, and her mother, Anne. They named her Hannah, which is from the Bible, and actually an interesting story about a woman who prayed, could not have children, and then had a whole bunch. And that's exactly what our Hannah does. I don't know if she prayed for it or not, but she had 8 that lived into adulthood, and actually a couple were quite locally famous. So we step from Colville, either with an E or without, and into the Griffith family. But first, we look at his letters. Griffith, David Griffith, who she married in 1766, later on he writes her, and some of those letters have survived, and they're in the manuscripts collection down in the Library of Virginia in Richmond. And it's there that we can find a mention of, "I'm so sorry, your mother's told me that your sister passed away 6 months ago, and I ran into someone who mentioned that he saw your brother in London, and he's a big shot on a ship," and things like that. It's still very unclear, but it seems like her brother may have been a loyalist. That's a whole other, the military history with this, with his letters being written, all of these letters, I'm trying to pull personal facts out of, but there's all these juicy tidbits about battles and stuff, because he's actually writing from the battlefields in the American Revolution. But in all that, I've pulled out that she had at least one brother, at least one sister, probably more, and that her family owned and operated some sort of business. Her mother was in a business. She had a shop, is what David called it, and her grandmother as well. And having been, you can see her, I couldn't resist. We'll see it at the end, but I'm gonna go ahead and show you her beautiful handwriting right now. And her spelling, her grammar, everything is just above and beyond. You won't believe. So when she becomes a widow and she has to write a legal document, we'll get into that. You'll get to see an example of her writing. She is married either October 22nd or 26th. The dates are kind of smudged, so there's 2 records of this. And the New York records, thanks to Ancestry.com, I found those in the marriage index. And they would start right away with David actually earning a little money here and there, being a medical doctor of all things. So he's going to be famous in Alexandria for being a reverend, not just any reverend, but rector of the Fairfax Parish. And that means he's going to be in charge of ministering to and operating the parish that includes what is now Christ Church in Alexandria. At that time, it was known as Alexandria Church, and another church out, you may have heard of it, Falls Church. And she's going to live right between those two. But before she gets there and kind of makes it big in the clergy wife world, they are just barely making ends meet, with him doing medical doctoring on the side. He had originally gone to London and studied medicine, but his heart was being called by God. He was a member of the Church of England, and he went back into school and finished right before he married Hannah. He actually finished getting his reverend doctorate, his philosophy. Please don't make me butcher any theological titles. I apologize, Episcopalians. You're all going to want to write me a letter after this. Let's hope Diane's here. She's already been helping me with my words. So I know that he's doing a little preaching for the organization out of New York that's assigning young ministers to areas, to zones, but these are poor places. They are rural, backwoods of mostly New Jersey. And then after a little bit of time kind of coming up in the ranks and doing it the hard way, they get a little bit of something shaking them up. They're going to get called to come all the way down to a totally different colony. But first, she's going to have their very first child, David Jr., in 1770, and their second, a son named Llewellyn, after the patriarch of the Griffith family. That's going to be in 1772, the same exact year that he would receive this parish in Shelburne, Loudoun County, Virginia, offering him to come on down. They have just purchased 465 acres of land in Leesburg. It's overlooking the valley. It's on the hilltop near Mount Gilead. It's beautiful. It just has nothing actually built on it. So they pack up, they get heading down there with the two babies, and they basically live in, you've seen that movie, The Money Pit? They kind of live in that house from The Money Pit for a few years with banging going on. It's like, then the war happens and people that were going to put the woodwork on in the inside of the glebe house take off and like, and that woodwork that's in the house now, the original woodwork to the Shelburne glebe house, may have not even come along until after the Revolution. So you've got them moving onto this land-rich place they've never seen before. They accept this offer, which sounds pretty cool. You have to have at least 200 acres of glebe lands, church lands, belonging to the Church of England for a parish rector in Virginia. But they have 465, and he's going to be working that land and selling the tobacco from it, and more than likely engaging, whether actually enslaving people himself or working with and through people who have been enslaved either directly by members of the Episcopalian faith in his parish or the leaders of the church, or have been hired and coming in for like day labor, essentially, because this is a huge task. There's no way, I'm not trying to paint a picture either, with all of the hard work I'm going to talk about Hannah having done. She was pretty amazing, but not especially unusual. And you'll find that there was even a term for ladies who picked up the slack big time on these big estates and kind of ran everything like, it's okay, don't worry about us, during the Revolutionary War. They're called deputy husbands. And so she's doing all that, but more than likely, my research hasn't concluded yet, but more than likely with enslaved laborers, of course. They move into this place that originally only has to be 20 feet by 48 feet, but it keeps getting bigger. And if you see the house today, it actually still stands in Leesburg. You'll see that it's been built out from a very core center, and that is that 20 by 48 foot structure that was built, started around 1772, 1773. It was built to face the creek and Mount Gilead at its east. And there are remnants of lots of outbuildings. We believe that not only did they have a nice stone bottom ice well, but also what appears to have been a kitchen. And there are some other things that are kind of cottage-like sheds now. And so I wonder if they lived in a smaller structure while this house, this grand glebe, was under construction in the early days, or at what point they moved into this half-done construction. I just think it's interesting with that many kids and everything going on. Your husband's away in the war and you're just like dealing with contractors. So this construction keeps going on and on. And you can see the house today at, it is a registered landmark of Virginia and a National Historic Place. You can see that very middle part there, a lot of additional bricks, and it's been almost completely gutted and fixed up since the 1830s and 1840s. But there are still remnants of those original walls. And they were the very first rector family to operate that parish. So it's kind of a big deal out in Leesburg and in Shelburne. And he's a pretty big deal out there. I mean, I'm just saying, if you've got a friend out in Loudoun, drop that name. So this is where she would have been romping with those youngest, the firstborn kids actually, in their younger days. And so if you go online, you want to take a little Google map tour of it, it's drop dead gorgeous. This is a very simple picture of it, which was hard to find. So you can kind of see it a little more simplistically, but it's got lots of bells and whistles, and it just looks so beautiful today out in the middle of all those mountains. So here she is in Shelburne, in the middle of Loudoun, where, by the way, yes, it's Virginia, but this is a place where you're still hearing about in the news people basically tackling wolves and running them off of their property and dealing with animals and wild beasts. quite a lot more than you would be in the city of Alexandria. And not sure if she grew up right in the city of New York or if she was used to this sort of thing, but she's back in the woods in Shelburne. They're going to be preaching what it was usually a parish in those days was 2 churches, maybe 3, that the rector, and this is what her husband was, would share his time and preach between those different churches. And one of theirs, the main church at Shelburne, was Leesburg Church. So she's actually there getting used to a whole new place, and she's an outsider from New York with these little kids in tow, and her husband gets fire in his belly to go join the Continental cause in the American Revolution. So he goes down to Williamsburg, and he's back and forth, and he doesn't want to leave her, but he's got to do this. So off he goes into the war, and thus becomes our deputy husband chapter of Hannah, or Hanny as he called her. This is just one of the many times he starts his letters. Her husband David begins his letters out during the middle of one time even Valley Forge at the end of the conflict, right before they shipped out or left, walked out. And he wrote her many times with this sentimental little beginning, "My dearest Hanny." And I would begin very sweetly too if I was about to go over all of the stuff that she was now in charge of all by herself back home. So in these letters, which are in the manuscript collection, they're called the David Griffith letters, and there's many more of them, but this is just the 19 letters, 51 pages in total, that were written from David Griffith during the American Revolutionary War directly to his wife, Hannah. So in looking at them, it gives us an insight into what was going on with the military. There's lots of good stuff I don't want to get into because it's a whole other segment that he's giving us firsthand insight into on the ground during the revolution. But it's actually the things inside those lines and in between those lines that I've really been playing with and living with for the last few months to see if I can recreate Hannah, because her letters to him, as of now, have not been found, have not survived. So we know, because he writes, "Thank you for telling me this, and I wish you'd be more descriptive about that." So we know she was writing. In fact, he chastises her gently a few times, like, "I know you're busy, but you never write." However, we don't have her side of that, and it's very likely that the letters were lost or intercepted somehow. He even alludes to that later on being the case, and is a little wary of sending her money because of letters being intercepted. But one of those letters, which I was able to pull quite a lot from, I hope you've already been looking at it. This is David Griffith's writing. And in this letter, he is writing that he wants to just once again remind her that he's turned everything at the plantation over to her in his absence. She is what Ulrich Thatcher is actually called a deputy husband. She's going to be fulfilling all of her own jobs and duties. And this is a time when there's still not really a market economy. There's no industrial revolution raging just yet. And factory and industrialization, all of that was around the corner. She would live to see that, of course, but at this time, she's still stitching shirts at home. She's still, if you want more milk for the babies, you're still going out and you're finding that dang cow. Where are you going? And you're milking the cow. And now you got to find this little boy. Where did he go? And he even writes her, "I hope my black horse comes back. Can you tell me more?" And I'm just thinking of her chasing a 7-year-old and a horse. Like, did you see it? Which way did they go? And so she's got all this plantation, domestic animals, livestock, children, all of these chores to do before he leaves. And now there's specific duties that had been left to the husband before. They're more traditionally male in those days that are now being gifted to the ladies in the form of deputizing them, so to speak. Now that's a modern term, but this was actually pretty commonly what was going on. You can see that in this letter, he actually, this is my favorite in the world. I've left it up a little too long perhaps, but did you all catch my favorite thing in the whole world that really helped me fall in love with her and him for all their faults? This really made them human to me when he mentions to her that he's very sorry that she's finding these things so bothersome. Here's my favorite part. But you may remember that my desire was, when last at home, to disencumber you of that care by selling off the stock first. You have only yourself to blame. And you may be assured that I shall not wish you to continue it longer than is agreeable to yourself. So I can see him wasting ink, by the way, and dipping it into that, and carefully with his nib pen, deciding I'm going to use this limited amount of paper here and then send it by carrier to my wife for a very eloquent, I told you so. And that's what he's done here. Just a gentle reminder from the field that I was right, you were wrong. So I can see her headstrongness coming across here. She's already had a run-in with him about this. No, we don't need to sell them. She's already been the one to say, I want to keep the livestock. Let's not sell them yet. And now here she's written him that things are crazy. And he's saying, well, when I told you so, I told you that. Didn't I tell you that? So that is when they came to life for me. So now this next letter, in amongst those 19 from those Revolutionary War days, he mentioned specifically, and this is not the only one, it's just an example, that he's going to send her money the first opportunity he gets for specific things that she's said, you know, look, we're really needing this, and so. She asked him specifically for guidance on certain things. And other times she doesn't. She just says, I paid Mr. Herbert this, and I will be going next week for that. And so you can tell by his responses, this is the information that he's giving her, and he's getting back with her saying, that's great. I just, hold off though, because I don't think I owe him that much. Can you wait till I get back to pay him that? Because I don't think that's right. And he pretty much talks with her as a partner would, someone discussing it and really valuing her opinion and also having a share in what's being done as well and a say in it. And then of course her duties are still going back to that domestic society, that domestic market where you need an essential, you don't go to the market square and buy it. You don't go to the department store and buy it, you make it. So on top of all of these things, specific things about this many pounds goes to that person and buy 2 bushels of that and make sure to thresh the wheat by this time and weevils and everything. He also requests her to make him 6 new collars and wristbands and gives her the measurements. So she's still just going with the flow and doing everything she did before. Pretty typical of those deputy wives of any station. Now, this letter in particular is from Bound Brook, written in December of 1778, just to give you an example of some of the places he was. That's in New Jersey. He wrote her early on from Williamsburg, and then a little bit later on Valley Forge and other places. And in this letter, he very gently works up to tell her that he's known for 6 months that her sister died. And that she keeps asking, apparently. He says, you keep asking me about your sister, and I've very carefully made sure not to mention her name for 6 months because I've known that she's dead this whole time, and I didn't want it to upset you. He specifically says that I was afraid that it might loosen your attachment to life. And he wished that he would be there with her when she got the news so that he could coax her through that. So apparently very close with her sister. And he was very worried about how she would take the news. He's afraid that she might hear through the grapevine, though. A particular person knows that's in the area. And so he tells her in this letter. And then he tells her soon after that, in the next few lines, that her Aunt Sally and her grandmother are doing well and comfortable in Hackensack. So they're still alive. And they're awaiting impatiently the evacuation of New York, which in his opinion, and most people that he's talking to, is very imminent. It's just a matter of time. The British are gonna get. So he's sitting there and he's writing her and he's remembering what she has written him in the last letter. And that's, as you read these letters, that's becoming more and more evident because you hear news from back in Loudon that's very concerning to him, and he addresses it along the way. We'll see some better examples of that than what I can think of right now. But then he also throws in quite a lot of insight, as I mentioned earlier, into the war, the revolution. You can see here, he addresses her as my Hanny again. He's not sure, when will that be, says you. Indeed, I cannot tell. The weather had turned so bad that his plans to go in to the town where her family lives and make sure that they were all right, even though they say they don't need anything, that he had prepared a pass for them and everything, but illness and weather has made it impossible. He's really hoping to get in though and see her mother in person. He mentions to her that he wants to give her mother some money to help her with evacuation and what she does after that. He says that they're comfortable, doing well, but pretty much everybody is just waiting for the very last cent that they have to completely dry up. Their fortunes are draining away, and it's not looking like it's going to be any better. And that whole area up there, Philadelphia, New York, they're all sort of in this holding pattern at this particular time in the war. And you can see in this letter that he is specifically hoping that he can give that money to mom before she evacuates so that she can buy up a lot of supplies and goods before prices get too ridiculously high. And he's going to try really hard to talk her into going and staying with Hannah in Loudoun County, which is interesting because we know that at that time, David's own mother, Sarah, was living with Hannah and the children. So that would have been a very full house. It's quite interesting. He mentions at the end of every single letter to give his love to their little flock and his dearest mother. So she was alive and well, at least through the Revolutionary War. And then when they moved from Shelburne here to Alexandria, we kind of lose any mention of her. And mom's alive as well. Hannah's mom is alive and had been running a shop prior to this. So he actually says in the very next line, instead of matter-of-factly leaving it at that he feels comfortable that Hannah would agree with him, that this was a decision that he made, but he knows that she would actually get satisfaction from it. And he thanks her for keeping him up on all of the duties. As I said, 51 pages of duties that are very specifically lined out to helping keep their wheat, their cattle, pigs, horses, tobacco, of course. Now tobacco would have been sold and would have been a part of that money would have been part of his payment as being the rector of the parish. There was a lot going on. And he said that over and over again, actually, that she had neglected to tell him certain things. He keeps prying and saying, you're not really telling me much. I'd love to know more, at least on his end, being out in the battlefields. He feels like he's getting a little neglected. And he mentions in one particular letter here that she has not mentioned specifically how the hay turned out. And he's actually been inquiring about this. And also how the servants behave. And what has become of Israel Wilkinson. I haven't looked him up yet to the nth degree, which I will, just so you know. I know some of you are jotting that down, so maybe you want to take that and roll with it. How about it? So I'm not sure exactly if this is referring with servants to a certainty that they were employing labor from enslaved men, women, children. But we do see later that she does have one tithable. We'll talk more about that when I get to it here in just a second. But to just pause there and say something about slavery, she's an Episcopalian. He's a rector of the Episcopalian Church. That level of morality and social prestige, however, does not mean that they were not partaking in the privileges and the institution of enslavement that was making Virginia so rich at that time. And it in fact was not against any rules of the church to enslave people. And Episcopalians, quite often the leaders actually push towards colonization if people were emancipated, if they were manumitted, actually colonizing, being sent to the African continent, places like Liberia and things like that. So you see Episcopalians come up over time, but not in slavery, but not as breakthrough abolitionists. So it wouldn't have been unheard of that she would. I'm just still trying to see what the extent of that relationship with enslaved labor was. I'm still working on that. I like that apparently if you break a horse when it's young, then you stun his growth and make him dull. I say break him. Okay. Now, she's got it made out there. You know, out in the wilderness, she's relaxed. She can't imagine cobblestone streets and all the brick buildings that are going on in Alexandria and the big city there. She's still there with a whole bunch of boys around her legs running in circles. She might get to town in Leesburg to take care of paying debts and picking up salt that she needs to salt the pork and to move things around to keep her family alive, but just kind of strolling down the streets like she might later in Alexandria, not happening. And you'll see that he in particular mentions his boys, and all of his children actually absolutely loved hearing every little detail that she had time to write about what the boys were saying and what they were doing. And he writes later that I didn't put it in here as an example, but wonderful little trinkets and things that he had specifically got in his mind. You know, he was getting this for the kids. He's going to bring home these little toys and things so that when he comes home, they'll be happy to see him. And unfortunately, the weevil is causing quite a bit of destruction out in Loudon at this time. So he's talking with her about that, responding to her last letter, and then talking with her about how necessary it is to act quickly on that. This is actually the time when he'd come home for a minute. One time he came home for a little while because George Washington, actually a comrade with him in the Revolutionary War, sent him home because David Griffith is not only Reverend and he's a chaplain in the Continental Army, but he's also at the same time, he's a dual commissioned officer and he's serving also as a surgeon. So he would actually get 1,000 acres of land, by the way, in Kentucky for payment, 500 for both commissions at the end of his Revolutionary War service. For that reason. So he comes home at one point to administer inoculations for smallpox and to do a few different things. And it's evidenced in the fact that they continue having children while he's gone. Elizabeth, who he refers to as Bet quite lovingly from that point on in his letters. And he then writes in 1776, this is around the same time that Elizabeth is born, little Bet is born, that he's in Williamsburg. And then from that moment, we've got a big hole there until June 3rd, 1778, when he writes from Valley Forge. A lot of similar things happening. Who knows how many letters were intercepted, never made it to her? Who knows how many letters, if she received them, something happened to them, or she decided that she didn't want to keep them? And of course, how many letters did she write to him? We don't know. But a lot of these letters go into detail about the evacuation that he hopes is coming soon of the British. He doesn't talk a lot, though, in the letters about the Battle of Monmouth. And that is actually interesting because he becomes a legend in that battle, having been the person, supposedly, who told George Washington, you've got to watch out for Charles Lee. This guy's not right. He's acting weird. Watch him tomorrow. I'm telling you, something's not happening the way it should in his head. And so Washington was very carefully, at Reverend Griffith's advice, he was watching Lee the next day and actually stopped that unnecessary retreat before it went snowballing downhill too far and saved a bit of the disaster from happening. So he comes back now, not yet in Alexandria, but when he arrives in Alexandria, he arrives to this legend and to his comrade, George Washington, and even Lafayette, who he knew in the war, visiting, and already to this status of elevation. So he's still calling Shelburne his home, even though he's barely there. And his wife is receiving these letters, West Point, and then finally September 1778, it looks like he might be getting out. And on top of that, he says, there's a little place called Fairfax in Virginia, a little east of there, and they want me to come and be in charge of the Fairfax parish, which includes Falls Church and Alexandria Church, which is Christ Church now. And this had been Truro Parish, which, if you're familiar with George Washington's, his church was part of Truro Parish. It was split in 1765, and the northern part of Truro became its own parish. So there's some confusion there when people say George Washington was a vestryman. He was officially a vestryman at Truro Parish, although this included Alexandria until 1765. But by the time that our Griffiths arrive, he actually writes in the letter, I want your sentiments on this. Do you think we should do it? He's making a big life decision with Hannah in mind. And Hannah must have said, let's go for it, because they head out as soon as he gets out of the military. Soon after this, they head from that western locale in Loudon east to Alexandria. They're going to live on a glebe that sits right in the middle of, so the glebe is the church lands and the glebe house that sits on it, right in between those two churches of Fairfax Parish. And they promptly have a child not too long after, February 25th, the only child we have the actual full date of birth for, and that would be the son Colville that she names after her maiden name. He's the fourth child, third son, if you're counting. Are you counting? You should start counting. And good gravy. Let's see. He is going to arrive in Alexandria, and as I said, already know all of the highest level folks. And then, according to George Washington's diary, he's going to visit just, I don't want to say constantly, but I mean, if he was the only guy visiting, the only friend and preacher stopping by to pick up, you know, like money that you owe the church, no big deal. But I can imagine George Washington probably had way too many other people stopping by and staying the night. So as I'm looking through, over 12 overnight visits, not just stopping by in the daytime, but at least a dozen or more overnight visits. One of them actually being, he shows up, gets invited to stay for the wedding of Frances Bassett, which is the favorite niece, they say, of Mrs. Washington and George Augustine Washington, and he stays the night after the wedding. But with all of these travels into the town and staying overnight at Mount Vernon, wants to even sit and chat with not just Washington, his old comrade, but Lafayette as well, we never see mention of Hannah. So where's Hannah? Well, Hannah's got her hands full, and Hannah is going to be having 4 more children to add to that first 4 within those next 9 years. Not sure exactly how they're spaced, but by the end of it, you're going to have William, Alfred, who would wind up becoming an Episcopalian minister as well later on, Camillus, and little Sarah, named for David Griffith's beloved mother. Camillus will actually wind up being a notorious slave catcher. He will mention at the end very quickly, would bring the family name back out into the spotlight for really bad reasons about 20 years after she passed. So Church of England, here's what's so crazy. It is completely switching over, saying we're going to form a new church. We can't be Church of England anymore. Church of England is not popular. It's after the Revolution now. They're taking all the glebe lands away from Church of England. So the Episcopal Church in the United States was formed, and David Griffith was one of the main driving forces behind this. In fact, he was up in Philadelphia many, many times for these church matters in the convention planning all this, and he was up there right when the official formation was agreed upon, the new doctrines and everything was all sorted in 1789, but he didn't make it to the convention. He died in his friend's home there from a sudden illness. Now, at that time, he was actually just giving up his position as the person who had been selected to be the very first American Episcopal priest in Virginia. He didn't have the money that it took, so it had been dragging for quite some time. He was the nominee, but he hadn't actually gone and gotten ordained because he had to go to England. Even though it's a separate church, the rules were 3 priests had to ordain you, and all of those had been loyalists and ran back to England really quick like. So the other 2 Americans that were chosen had lots of money. They went, they got ordained, they came back, and they were ready. They were ready and waiting for that 3rd one to come back and have an official 3-ring American ordaining circle. And it didn't happen for David. They didn't have that kind of money. And that's what makes them so interesting. They were at this Virginia gentry level, this prestigious social class, yet they were landed. They did have lots in Alexandria. They've been investing and purchasing lots and improving on them for leasing out things over years and years in Alexandria, but they were not big shots, big landowners, and they were not old family Virginians. And that's one reason many Episcopal scholars say that it may have not just been he didn't have the money to go, and the church didn't have the money, although the church had some major issues, switching around and losing pensions and losing government funding because they're not being paid by tax money any longer. But there were also a handful of people that really didn't like him in Williamsburg, because that circle that was running the church before this upstart from New York came were mostly old Virginia, those first families. So there was a little discontent, and he had just turned over and said, thank you, but no thank you. I'll let the nomination go to someone else. Goes to Philadelphia for this last convention, and he dies. He is only 47. She has 8 children. The oldest is 19. What? And she gets told, oh yeah, he's being buried up here in the Christ Church here in Philadelphia, and sorry about it. So she is now no longer a femme sole, a femme covert, which is the legal categorization of a woman who's under her husband legally. She's gone back to her femme sole status, which she had prior to marriage, and now as a widow, she regains it. This legally allows her to do some things that a woman who's married to a living husband couldn't do, and she doesn't seem to shy away from that. Her background as a deputy husband and her background with knowing business and having to survive all of that sort of business dropped on top of her during the war really show up. She decides, I'm not going to sell off our lands and our lots in Alexandria because that's good for the future. I can lease that out. I'm going to take that Kentucky land that my husband was given for serving in the war, and I'm going to sell that to pay off all of our debts, because they had a lot of loans, a lot of things over the years to fix up those lots that had to be drained and built upon for them to really be worth anything in Alexandria. You can see this is just one of many. I so far have not been able to come to an exact number. I've got at least 10 lots, but I think there's many more than that they had all over town. And it shows up in the records sometimes as who it's being leased out to. And then later we'll actually see that her name is in records to show us that she was leasing something herself. She was leasing from John Wise, that beautiful little place on Royal Street. Now, in order to do this, she needs to, because her husband did not write a will, he wrote something out, he meant to take it in, never got done. It says, I got some debts and my Kentucky land's perfect for selling. Here's some people I want to be in charge of cutting it up and surveying it. She has to take this to the government and to the House of Burgesses in Virginia. She has to say, is this okay? Can I move forward with this stuff? Now, there's a little problem with that, which would haunt her after she died, haunt the family after she passed even. The children would technically be getting that automatically after she passed. So it seems that Camillus, at least Camillus, maybe others, but especially Camillus, was not jazzed about her cutting that land up and selling it. And in fact, when he became an adult, just after her coffee house days, when she was in retirement, he would sue for rights to that land and try to stop any more selling of that and claim his inheritance. So you can see the petition there. She wrote the government, they approved it. They put a notice in the paper saying that she was petitioning to take this land and go forth with this selling of it. And then you'll see that she is moving out of her brick house. And she is in 1793, December 1793. It's mentioned in the Alexandria Gazette here under to be rented there on the top left, that it was lately occupied. So she'd been there for a little while after her husband's death in August of 1789, perhaps there the whole time, maybe not. We do know that she stayed at the Glebe House for just a little while, but the problem was the new rector was technically going to move in and live there. That was Brian Fairfax, the 8th Lord Fairfax, and he already had a gorgeous estate. So instead he said, you know what? Her son, David Jr., right after Dad passed, maybe the first year after Dad's passing, her son, 20-year-old David Jr., married Lord Brian Fairfax's daughter, Elizabeth. And so Brian Fairfax said, you two young kids can just live in the Glebe House as long as I'm the rector. So at least she didn't have to worry about him. She takes the 7 younger ones, though, and heads to Alexandria and starts managing those lots that she's leasing out, doing a little boarding house stuff on the side. And then you see in May of 1794, but it could have happened earlier. She could have opened up her coffee house before this time. This is just when she was advertising, wanted to hire in our newspaper a boy or manservant as a waiter in the Alexandria Coffee-House. So this is the first time we see her establishment being called the Alexandria Coffee-House, kind of a big deal. So then you go through and you look for any mention of Alexandria Coffee-House in newspapers, right? Problem is, over the years, there are a couple coffee houses that come here and there. Busy port city with lots of rich merchants. That's what a coffee house was about. You're not going to find a coffee house in a backwater town or, you know, a rural area like Loudon. You would find taverns, you would find other types of public houses that sold tippling alcohol, and those would all be classified as ordinaries. She gets her ordinary license and then leases this building that she would move into from John Wise. And she opens up something totally different that is really rare among ordinaries. Coffee houses aren't very common because you need to have a thriving class of wealthy merchants to patronize them. And then on top of that, when you do see that smaller section over there of coffee houses, and you take a look at their proprietors in the late 1700s, they're mostly men. There was sort of an unspoken social prestige level that suited males in those days. And yet the widow Griffith, as you'll see her mentioned at the bottom left of your screen there, they write her in 1796 in one of the many wonderful primary resources still being kept down at the Archaeology Museum. So I got to see these in person. You'll see that she is being called Widow Griffith, and she's actually in this particular land book, instead of some of the others that just listed her and the lot she was at, this lists one male tithable. You guys see right in the middle there where people have listed 1, 3, and 1, and you see that last one at the bottom there is actually for Widow Griffith. And at the very top, it's in the column for male tithables, so technically 16 years old and older, a male that could provide labor. At this point in time, not clear, but seems to be technically could be a freed man, could be an older son, but very likely that this was a person that she had enslaved or that for whatever reasons was living with her. I don't want to make too many assumptions, but being that it would have been very common for a woman having to run a business like this to enslave a person at that time to do this, and that her Episcopalian faith and everything we know about her doesn't make that morally, it opens that possibility. We have to wonder who we're looking at here, who that one represents. So that one is haunting me currently. But what we can tell you is that, sorry about my slow curtains, they're much more exciting the first 5 times. After the coffee house, so she's there, 1793, we see Alexandria personal property and land tax copies of mutual insurance policy from 1796, and many other things. A census in 1790, the town census, which started before the US Census. And so we have these documents showing that she was at the coffee house, but oddly enough, they're not matching up just yet. I hope I'll have better timeframes for you, but just wrapping this up to conclude, if you were to go out and say, I just listened to this lecture about Hannah Griffith, and in a nutshell, she ran the coffee house over there at Gadsby's Tavern between this date and that date, I don't really have that takeaway for you yet. And here's why. Because when you notice the Alexandria City Land Book, we start looking carefully at all of John Wise's property, you start seeing that, okay, Hannah Griffith was there in 1795 in DO, dormer room, probably for 60 pounds rent. And then 1796, she's there. So 1795, 1796, although we noticed that there was earlier some mention of her running the coffee house. But unfortunately, there's a gap in those records of the city land book between 1790 and 1795. So I can't tell if it was 93, 92. Anyway, we know she's there. 95, it's 96, it's 97, she's still there. She pays her rent for the year, it's still 60 pounds. And then in 1798, she pays her rent, and then she disappears from the records. And in 1799, she's not renting that place or any place from John Wise. And then in 1800, she's back. And just for that 1 year, apparently. And so we're not quite sure yet what we're looking at, but possibly the coffee house kept running with someone else running it. We do know that by the time she left in 1800, John Gadsby's running the city hotel next door, and he would take over running the coffee house for a while. So this tells us, I believe, that this was a well-run establishment, that she had that social prestige high enough to make that class of wealthy merchants want to associate with her, to come and pay the subscription fee that kept away the riffraff, to pay for the exotic coffees from all over, the stimulating beverage that was associated with bright minds and sophisticated conversation. And she'd made quite a name for herself there, enough for Gadsby to want to hang on to it and to kind of be a nice touch for his wealthy clientele. So we see that when she leaves, she keeps making money on the side there as running a boarding house in her new place that has a few extra rooms, and of course collecting lease around town from those lots. So she's renting a warehouse too, lots of things going on. And you can see that Perrin Brothers actually opening up in Alexandria, well, they've been open, but they've just gotten in their winter goods. They're actually in 1801 still referring to the coffee house as a landmark. So it did make a mark, and it was apparently the coffee house, meaning a pretty big deal. Could have been another one by this time that was sort of starting to make a name for itself around the square, because we do have some pretty soon after this, Nicholas Hanna's Coffee House and some others that pop up in the paper. But we're looking at a landmark essentially in a town where the newspaper wouldn't say this is happening over here. It would say that this land auction is going to happen at the coffee house, and people would know. They would just know that's where it is. Her obituary tells us that she passed away in November 1811, but I cannot locate her grave yet. So please, if anyone does know where Hannah Colville Griffith is buried, I would greatly appreciate getting an email from you. We do have a grave for a Griffith at Alexandria's church, gosh, I lost the word for it. The new word for it. That new word for Alexandria Church, Christ Church. Perhaps Eliza Llewellyn, again, that patriarch's name of the Griffith family, was a granddaughter that she never met. That is the only Griffith I can find there, though, but I have not yet, with COVID and whatnot, have not gone into the records of the burials there. So I will be doing that. You can see here, I mentioned to you that Camillus wanted a stop to all the surveying and piecing out and selling of the lands in Kentucky. And so he's actually suing his family. He lists his brothers and sisters and their spouses and his mom at the top, Hannah Griffith. And this drags on for several years, actually, trying to go ahead and have the land taken from mom and divided up among the kids so that no more selling can happen. It's also a little after she passes, 1823, that Camillus makes a name for himself, going up to Massachusetts and stirring up trouble by attempting to kidnap and assault a man who has escaped enslavement. His name's Randolph. And Massachusetts wasn't playing. They arrested Camillus and said, you can't do that. But at the end of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus Camillus Griffith, unfortunately, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793 was upheld. And so he's quite famous for having showing that the courts would uphold this Fugitive Slave Act as late as 1823, and with such a violent and ugly way of him breaking into and seizing this man. So it just, goes to show, again, the larger connection to the institution of slavery. Whether someone actually was enslaving someone themselves did not mean they were necessarily out of the slave trading business. There were, of course, many people making a living like Camillus did. And so, having talked faster than I ever have before, it's so much, and yet there's so few facts that you can go home and be like, this is what we know. So hopefully you got something from it. Let me know if you have any questions. I can clarify something for you maybe.
I've been tracking questions as we go, actually, and people have been very active. So some of them you answered naturally through the course, but I'm just going to go through them as they came up. So we're going to first jump back to the letters. Okay. And there were a couple of questions around there. I don't think we need to pull them up, but more the letters themselves certainly seem to play a big role in the research. And they're pretty great with the details that you can pull out of that. One of the questions was, did you have to transcribe all of those, or were they already transcribed when you found them?
Every last word. And because of the pandemic, I could not go down to Richmond and see them in person and just kind of, enjoy a day and transcribe maybe. I actually had to ask Richmond to scan them at each 51 pages, scan, and email them to me, which they did for like $60. So you can do that if you guys want to do some research on your own. Scholars know this, but the Library of Virginia is there, and our research library of special collections in Alexandria is there to help you with some of the stuff you would think, I can't touch that, I can't see that, I can never look at this letter between, two people, a personal marriage letter, but they're there. And I did have to, that was exciting because I realized nobody had ever translated these. So I'm reading something carefully for the first time in many years since maybe her family, and I'm trying to apply it to something bigger for the first time, but it was also exhausting to transcribe. They have beautiful penmanship, both of them, but still.
It's still penmanship, yep. And then when you were talking about letters, you mentioned they had concerns about them getting intercepted, and it's likely some of them did. Could you go into a little more detail about who was doing the intercepting?
Sure. So a lot of the letters come from Reverend Griffith, 1776 through 1778, not off somewhere and saying, what I heard's happening, but he's sitting there in Valley Forge, during the reason why Valley Forge is famous. And he's actually, oh, thank you, Nancy. And he's actually right there outside of New York, and they're all poised like any minute now. We think this is going to happen, which now we've got hindsight to know, when evacuations were going to happen, things like that. And in a lot of cases, he was correct. But he's living with this anxiety, and he's maybe a little paranoid, but then again, it's taking forever for Colonel Powell, who's oftentimes the man who visits back home, to take the letter to Hannah. He trusts Colonel Powell, but when he has to send it by way of someone else that's just sort of a messenger for the camp, that's when he's like, I haven't heard from you in a while. Is that because your letter got lost? Is that because you haven't had time because you have 8 children to write me? And so from him, it's hard to tell if he's like, by golly, you didn't get that letter with the money in it. I knew it. They were taking my things. And if it just got lost in the war and the chaos. But it's very possible because of his intel and him specifically speaking of, I keep hearing the cannons, and they have several new ships that I heard, and they're docked down there by the... Some of his stuff doesn't get too exciting in these letters, but I wonder about the ones that are missing.
What details he might have accidentally divulged.
A nice surgeon and chaplain going, they're gonna strike at dawn. I don't know. I don't think he was giving away info willy-nilly, but
right.
He was right to be nervous.
Oh, no. Oh, definitely a challenging time. And the mail system in general is a fascinating one. I'll put a plug in for a podcast called Ben Franklin's World. And they have at least one, if not more, episodes. And they're usually like an hour and a half with a scholar interviewing. That's dedicated to the mail system in revolutionary and early America. So it's its own thing.
Well, I have to say what's interesting is nowadays, I don't know about you guys, but my grandmother used to start a letter on Monday, write a little bit on Tuesday, come back to it on Thursday, and then finally send it at the end of the month or something. What's interesting about this is you can see him rapid firing in a lot of situations when he's got some time. He'll write one, and then 2 days later, he dates another one. And they may have all gone at the same time, but he's writing these sort of a similar process of life at camp, and let's stay close. And so it's a very personal journey through those letters.
Wow, nice. Now this one is going to the parishes, and part of it is probably there's just a lot of technical words in it, but Truro Parish is one location. Is there a glebe parish, or is glebe the name of the building, the land?
Exactly. So okay. Glebe, I'm probably messing this up, so I apologize for oversimplifying, but glebe, to my best understanding, you can kind of substitute the word church, owned by the church. So there are many glebes, and you've been on Glebe Road, and different glebes belong to different parishes, which generally in those days, I'm not sure how it works now, but they connected a couple different churches with one main rector in charge of it. So he would alternate visiting and preaching at the different churches. And she would in turn have double just imagine, you're a reverend's wife today, but you've got maybe you're in charge of a whole group, district or 2 or 3 different churches. So that was what her life was like. And they happened to be very busy ones here in Alexandria, right next to this busy port city. And all of a sudden, hey, you're in the upper class. So let's, get it together. And if it hadn't been that, it's interesting because that turn, her being part of this particular glebe, not just Shelburne glebe or some other glebe, but the Fairfax glebe, is really what helped build her that social prestige to make this an option for her to go into the coffee house business. Well, of course, one of the busiest port cities in America. Sure, I can do what most women don't do and run a coffee house for most important people. So yeah, glebe, pretty much church land. So you would say that the glebe was the lands, and then the glebe house is the house upon the lands, usually between 200 and 400 acres in those days in Virginia.
Great, thanks for clarifying. And then thinking about her experience, you used the phrase deputy husband, and wanted to just double check, did that give her any legal status, or is it simply a phrase? And was it a historic term, or is it one we use now when we're looking back?
It's a modern term. It's been just recently in the last decade used by Ulrich Thatcher, historian, who made the term popular in her work about women in the Revolutionary War era. And this deputy husband is just so easy to carry forward. I glommed right onto it because it sums up that it's not a legal, like becoming a widow, there was a definite shift. And I'm not 100% clear on all of the intricate things that she could and couldn't and now could do as a widow. But there certainly were some, she didn't need, like co-signers or need her son to do some things that otherwise she would need the husband for while her husband was alive to do with selling the land and leasing and such. But there were so many other things. And so instead of trying to like pick apart and name the different elements of her job, that deputy husband came to just kind of collectively, oh my gosh. And it was very different. Everybody's deputy husband was different. So a person who wasn't the clergyman's wife, who didn't have 8 children, who didn't have, everyone was a little different, but they had this shared struggle at that particular time to get through the war.
Great, thanks. That makes sense. And a quick point for clarification, when we're talking about the Alexandria Coffee-House, the one that Hannah's running, that is in the 1785 building of what now is Gadsby's Tavern Museum.
If you're not familiar, it is the smaller, the one on the left-hand side, the Georgian style building, the smaller of the 2 in the complex that makes up today's Gadsby's Tavern Museum complex.
Great, and I've dropped a link into Gadsby's Tavern's website, so you can always go and check that out, and pictures of the buildings are there. There's a really brief mention of her in our online exhibit, which is also on view when you go through the museum. But yeah, she has a one-liner mention in the panel, and this certainly expands way beyond what we got into the exhibit, but you could see the picture and check out the exhibit and how she pieces into it there.
I'm hoping that'll be a little different in the future because I'm sure you'll agree, the tavern and the coffee house are so, they're so interesting to talk about, to compare to one another. It really has made my appreciation for the City Hotel and the tavern and the other businesses that are not quite like the coffee house, but similar. It's made it more rich. So hopefully we'll talk about this more when you come in to see us.
Yes, and it sounds, she moves from coffee house to, she continues to rent out land. So she's collecting rent, but she's also operating a boarding house. And it mentions it's in a location formerly occupied by Mr. Vivent. I'm assuming he's just somebody who operated the boarding house before her.
Yes, so you see that a lot, and I'm sure there's probably someone going, no, Mr. Vivent was an amazing, I'm sure, I hate to just casually say he was just somebody. These are people that are noteworthy. Of course, people know them for some reason. And so I'm sure that he was locally known for something, but as far as I know, I didn't go down that particular rabbit trail, but I'm sure I will now. Now I'm gonna be all over that. Yeah, at one point after she left, she had like a dozen people living in her house with her, and they're listed out, and their occupations are listed out, and they were all merchants except for one attorney. So her gentleman, when it says gentlemen can come and board, she means gentlemen, and she's carrying this social prestige into her rates, into the section of town she's offering board, in the clients that she takes in. And yeah, so it was very calculated, and all around she was not just happening upon being a businesswoman. She definitely was taking the reins to get her life in order after her husband's passing.
Sounds like it. Great. Oh, and I have a question. When did the subscription coffee house begin in the 1785 building? So
when did it end?
When did it end? Yes, you're reading it too, and reading it much better than I am. So we know John Gadsby, who's the namesake for the Tavern, operates the smaller building, which Hannah had operated as a coffee house. He continues operating it as a coffee house. So he's asking when the coffee house portion of the business ended. You may not know that. That may be something I'd have to email our panelists or our guest afterwards.
Well, I know that, here's what I know. She was paying $60 for running her space, and she was running it as a coffee house. And then after she leaves, it no longer says Hannah Griffith and DO for wherever she was located on the property. It now, when it's being leased out to John Gadsby, is coffee house. So it's established, and that's what it is. And then it's Brick Royal on Royal Street, the brick house. And right away, when it changes hands, okay, from 1800 being $60 again for the year, the next record we have is 1802. John Gadsby paid $3,500. So this is again, then within a couple years, it's $24,000 for the coffee house and tavern for this lease. And so the lease records start more question trails than they answer. Was that just that space, or why was this such a difference? There was also a lot going on economically with the establishment of banks or just any kind of currency. Money is still different everywhere you go. And so that is a very unique time, that turn of the century, that I haven't quite figured out yet. But I do know that in some form or fashion, that business was still alive, it seems, through 1807 is the last time, or last time it's mentioned specifically as tavern and coffee house in the lease records. But that does not mean that 1808 didn't just, list it some other way, or maybe we missed something in 1810. But this is from a collection of stuff that other wonderful researchers have already done before my time, and I just haven't gone back to see if they missed something. I'm like, they got it. They're probably right. 1807, that's fine. And you'll see around that time, around 1802. And so there's another coffee house that pops up. It doesn't give the exact, they're really great about not giving you the exact place. They're just like, meet at Nicholas Hannah's coffee shop. And so I do know that apparently she was part of a pretty trendy scene, small group of coffee houses that did very well right around that square. And it's hard to tell sometimes where, especially if you're going to rely, I'll tell you, I'll warn you, if you rely on newspaper ads, that will really mess you up, because Nicholas Hannah may say, Nicholas Hannah's coffee house, but then after a year, people know him. So he says, guess what? Alexandria's coffee house, and leaves me going, wait, isn't she dead? What's happening? So it's now the it's the important one in Alexandria, like City Hotel, right? But if 30 years passes, there might be another building that calls itself the City Hotel. So
right,
it's tricky.
The fun of research and why it never ends. Right. Well, I want to thank you for sharing everything. I know that it's been a journey going through all of the records and trying to piece it together even during the pandemic. Archives shutting down physically has definitely made it much more challenging for all of us. So I'm glad we're able to get some of those records. I know that you are more than happy for those that are volunteering or working with us. If they have a question, they're welcome to reach out to you. Yes, and please. I want to point out in the chat, I just dropped a link, and that is to our online calendar, because there are a lot of events coming up in Historic Alexandria that I want to put a plug for before we close down for the night. And it's a mix of items that would be on our online store where people purchase the tickets for tonight, but also directly through website, free registration kind of things with the Alexandria Community Remembrance Project. So like next Monday is a lecture presented by our sister cities. And that's the lecture Ireland and the French Connection that's available in our online store. But then on Saturday, a week from this Saturday, kicks off a first of a 4-part series by the Alexandria Community Remembrance Project titled A White Historian Confronts Slavery. So you can register for each of those right on the Alexandria Community Remembrance website. But instead of sending you to all these different places, definitely suggest just go to the calendar. You'll see all of the events. We've had a lot happening. And a special announcement, this group can hear it first. We have a ball that will be happening virtually. So we did a virtual birth night ball. We're going to do a virtual spring ball. I think it's going to be called the Boston Ball on April 17th. So that is the next Gadsby's Tavern Museum specific event coming our way, besides it reopening on March 26th. So with that, I'm going to say thank you to everybody for coming tonight. And thank you, Kristy, for sharing all of your work. I know that was a lot of effort behind that, and really glad you shared.
I just noticed from Emily, I've just figured out how to look at the chat, that you had a great question earlier, Emily. I don't know if I answered it for you, but George Washington did not stay with the Griffiths. It was actually Reverend Griffith staying with George Washington all of those times. And in his diary, Washington even mentions when one of the sons is sent out with a little note in hand that says, "My dad, Reverend Griffith, would like you to pay for your pew subscription, please, sir." And so there was a little bit of friendliness there in those days. And also, can you please pay the money that helps me stay the way I am? So just looking at chat, I noticed that. I hope I got to everybody.
Exciting, yeah.
And I hope I didn't confuse you more with Truro Parish. So Truro was a big parish, but by the time they came along, it was part of it was broken off, and the top part was Fairfax. So I hope if nothing else, you guys have been thoroughly confused enough to go and do some research on your own and figure out how rich the Episcopalian history is in this town. And I've been going around and just finding the different churches, the original Falls Church that she would have taken the kids to, and imagining her sitting there with him preaching on their alternate Sundays, and it still stands. So I should have put a picture of it in here so you can go out and see these buildings. What a place we live in to be able to step outside of books and walk around. And it's great while you're being, masked and not being able to talk to folks. Just go and stroll around these yards. Go on Find a Grave and put in information for me about finding her grave. When you find it, please do that, because it's driving me crazy. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for listening.
And good night, everybody.
Night.
Bye.